A knife slides through a jar of peanut butter, and the surface tells two completely different stories. On the front, a rustic script font, a sun-drenched paddock, the word natural picked out in gold foil. Flip it over, and the ingredient panel starts telling you something else entirely. This is the jar sitting in millions of Australian pantries right now. The one you spread on toast without a second thought because it's peanut butter. And how complicated can peanut butter really be? More complicated than you'd think. Consumer Group Choice has spent years quietly testing supermarket peanut butter, and what keeps turning up isn't poison and it isn't fraud. It's something quieter and, in some ways, more interesting, labels that are technically accurate and still manage to leave you with the wrong impression. Over the next 20 minutes, we're breaking down 8 jars currently sold at Coles, Woolworths, and Aldi, ranked by how far the marketing on the front directs from what's actually declared on the back. By the end, you'll be able to read any peanut butter label on any shelf in about 15 seconds flat. Before the countdown starts, a quick reality check on the rules of the game. In Australia, peanut butter isn't a protected legal term the way extra virgin olive oil is. A jar can be mostly peanuts with added oil, sugar, and salt mixed in, and it's still perfectly legal to call the result peanut butter, full stop. 2 regulators sit behind everything you're about to hear. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission enforces country of origin labelling and takes action against conduct that's genuinely misleading. Food Standards Australia-New Zealand, known as FSANZ, sets the rules for what has to appear on a nutrition information panel and an ingredients list. Neither of them polices how rustic, wholesome, or natural a jar is allowed to look on the front. So to be clear from the outset, this countdown is not a safety investigation. Nothing in this video has been recalled, and nothing here is dangerous to eat in normal amounts. Instead, every jar is ranked on 4 things: the size of the gap between the front of pack story and the actual ingredient list, how much added sugar or sodium sits in the jar compared with the plain 100% peanut benchmark, how honestly the true country of origin is disclosed, and whether the price you're paying matches what you're actually getting. Legal and fully transparent are 2 very different things, and that gap is exactly where this video lives. One more distinction worth holding on to. There's a real difference between a regulator's finding, an independent test result, and a company's own marketing copy. And we'll flag which one you're looking at for every entry, because treating a disclosed ingredient the same as a proven scandal helps nobody. Number 8. The vegetable oil loophole. Most shoppers glance at vegetable oil on a peanut butter label and assume it means some generic, unremarkable plant oil, nothing worth a second thought. Here's the catch: nobody tells you that at the shelf. Under Australian labelling rules, palm oil can legally be declared simply as vegetable oil, with no requirement to name it specifically. Choice flagged this exact loophole when it tested dozens of supermarket peanut butters nationally, finding that most jars with an added stabilizing oil listed it only as vegetable oil or vegetable fat, palm oil included but never named. Among the products using that generic wording were Sanitarium's Smooth Peanut Butter and Aldi's Bramwell's Smooth American-Style Peanut Butter. To be fair, this isn't a case of any single company lying to you. It's a labeling standard that Choice itself has campaigned to tighten since 2015, without success so far because regulators worried that forcing every oil source onto every label would make things more confusing, not less. The practical fix is simple, and it works on any jar you pick up. If a peanut butter needs a stabilizer to stop the oil separating, that generic vegetable oil wording on the ingredient list is very often palm oil wearing a plain disguise. It's worth saying plainly that palm oil itself isn't a health hazard in the amounts used here. FSANZ permits it, and plenty of dietitians will tell you the saturated fat content matters more than the plant it came from. The issue is purely about being able to identify it if you'd rather avoid it, whether for sustainability reasons or simple curiosity. Number 7. The imported Noctis Gemmis belongs to Mivers, a family-owned Melbourne's business that has built almost its entire brand identity around Australian-grown peanuts, right down to the Kine-Roy sourcing story told proudly on its website and packaging. Here's the wrinkle worth knowing before you assume every jar on the shelf carries the same guarantee. Mavers is upfront, if you actually go looking for it, that Australia simply doesn't grow enough peanuts to supply the company's full production volume. As a result, several of its everyday jars, the standard extra crunchy and smooth ranges you'll usually find stacked highest and cheapest on the shelf, are made with less than 10% Australian ingredients, according to the country of origin statement published on major retailer product listings. The dedicated 100% Australian line genuinely is what it says on the label, sourced from Queensland peanuts around the Kingaroy region. But unless you are comparing two different Mavis jars side by side, it's incredibly easy to assume the whole brand carries that homegrown promise. This looks more like a genuine supply chain problem than a marketing trick. Australian peanut farming, quite simply, cannot meet national demand on its own right now. But it's exactly why the small country of origin bar on the back matters more than the bigger, prouder story printed on the front. Number 6. The sodium promise that needs shicking is less about a single named brand and more a warning about an entire category, peanut butter marketed as reduced salt or lite. The underlying health claim is genuine enough. A lower sodium jar can genuinely matter if you're managing blood pressure or watching your intake for medical reasons. But here's the nuance that gets lost at the shelf. Lite on the front of a jar legally only refers to whichever single nutrient triggered that specific claim. It says nothing at all about the sugar, the saturated fat, or the kilojoules sitting right beside it on the very same nutrition panel. We went looking for a published, verified Australian example of a specific light pineapple quietly loading up on sugar to compensate for the salt it removed, and we couldn't confirm one. So we're not going to pretend one exists just because it would make a punchier entry. What we can tell you, backed directly by FSANZ's own labelling guidance, is that a single nutrient front-of-pack claim is never the whole nutritional picture in peanut butter or anywhere else in the supermarket. So whenever you see light, reduced, or light on a jar, treat it as an invitation to read the rest of the panel properly, not as a verdict on the whole product. Number 5. The third in Radiant's surprise is Bega, whose original never oily, never dry recipe is arguably the single most recognizable peanut butter in the country, sitting in pantries from Perth to Cairns. Its ingredient list, confirmed on Bega's own website and matched exactly on major retailer listings, reads roasted peanuts at 85%, vegetable oil containing an antioxidant, sugar, then salt, in that order. Bega has publicly acknowledged that its vegetable oil blend includes a small proportion of palm oil, under 10% of the total product, which the company says is RSPO certified as sustainably sourced. The peanuts themselves come from a mix of Australian and Argentinian growers, and the jar carries a less than 10% Australian ingredient statement on major retailer product pages, simply because Australian-grown peanuts alone can't cover the volume Bega needs. None of this breaks a single rule, and none of it is hidden if you look. But if you'd always assumed Bega's flagship jar was closer to pure ground peanuts than a genuinely processed spread, the actual ingredient order, oil before sugar, sugar before salt, tells a slightly more complicated story than never oily, never dry quietly implies on the front. Worth knowing, Bega does sell a genuinely single ingredient alternative under its Simply Nuts range, made from 100% Australian peanuts with nothing else added at all. So a cleaner option from the exact same company sits right there on the same supermarket shelf, if you know which jar to reach for. It's a useful reminder that the brand and the specific jar aren't the same decision. A company can sell both the processed version and the plain version at the same time, and the only thing standing between you and the one you actually want is 30 seconds spent comparing two labels instead of grabbing the first jar at eye level. Number 4, the country of Oregon, asterisk, is a pattern rather than one single named product. Gourmet or organic style peanut butter jars that carry an Australian distributor's address prominently on the front label, while the peanuts themselves were actually grown, roasted, and jarred somewhere else entirely. Under ACCC country of origin rules, simply packing or lightly processing a product in Australia does not automatically make it made in Australia. The origin bar on the back has to genuinely reflect where the ingredients came from, and it usually sits in far smaller type than a distributor's proud local street address printed across the front. To be completely fair here, we don't have a verified named case of a specific gourmet peanut butter brand actually breaching that standard, so we're not accusing any particular company of doing so. This is best understood as a structural feature of how imported specialty foods are legally allowed to present themselves on Australian shelves, not a scandal attached to any one jar. The fix is exactly the same every time you're unsure. Ignore the distributor's address altogether and go straight to the small percentage bar near the barcode, because that's the only part of the label the ACCC actually enforces. The ACCC has taken action against country of origin claims in other food categories in the past, so the enforcement mechanism is real and it does have teeth. It's simply not something that applies automatically just because a distributor's office happens to be in Sydney or Melbourne. So far, every gap we've uncovered is legal, technically disclosed somewhere on the jar, and still remarkably easy to miss in a 5-second supermarket glance. If one of these brands is already sitting in your cupboard right now, tell us which number caught you out, and stick around because the next 3 entries include the single most expensive mistake on this entire list. Number 3. The Fissus markup covers the keto, paleo, and protein-boosted peanut butters that have quietly colonized an entire section of the health food aisle over the last few years. Strip away the branding, and most of these jars contain the same standard roasted peanuts as everything else, plus one small addition, often a splash of MCT oil or a scoop of added whey or pea protein, that lists the protein count by only a handful of grams per serve. That's a real, measurable difference, and it can genuinely matter to someone tracking macros closely, but it typically arrives with a price tag roughly double or even triple a standard jar of equivalent size. We haven't found any verified case of a specific specialty brand actually misrepresenting what's inside. The ingredient panels on these products are, as far as we can confirm, accurate and compliant. The gap here is about value, not honesty. Before paying a real premium for a diet buzzword on the front of a jar, do the maths per 100 grams against a plain peanut butter. Then decide whether the extra protein genuinely justifies what you're being asked to pay for it, because stirring your own scoop of protein powder into a cheaper tub gets you most of the same result for a fraction of the cost. Number 2, the Health Star rating mismatch goes to Aldi's Bramwell's range, sitting at the budget end of the shelf, and according to a 26 dietitian-led analysis of supermarket nut butters, one of the least favorably rated jars nationally reviewed. Bramwell's crunchy peanut butter is made with around 90% peanuts, with the remaining share split between added salt, sugar, and palm oil, and it carries roughly 11 grams of saturated fat per 100 grams, among the highest of every jar compared in that analysis, driven largely by that palm oil content sitting right there on the ingredient list. To Aldi's credit, a company spokesperson has stated publicly that all ingredients and nutritional information are clearly listed on its packaging. And checking the label confirms that's accurate. Nothing here is actually hidden from you. The product also carries a 4-star Health Star rating, a system that critics, choice included, have long argued can be inconsistent between genuinely comparable products. None of this makes Bramwell's unsafe to eat, and plenty of shoppers are perfectly happy with the trade-off. It simply means a lower shelf price is being bought, quite literally, with more added fat and a small share of actual peanut than the pricier jars sitting right beside it. Number 1, the W1 Nissus brand paradox. And the entry that ties this entire investigation together is Sanitarium, a company whose public identity, built over more than a century through breakfast staples like Wheat Bix, rests almost entirely on wholesome, trustworthy, health-forward branding. Its smooth peanut butter inherits that same halo effect without even trying. Clean typography, a straightforward sounding name, the quiet implicit promise of a company that simply wouldn't cut corners on something as basic as peanut butter. And yet Choice's own testing places Sanitarium's jar among the exact supermarket peanut butters that list their added stabilizing oil only as generic vegetable oil. The very same labeling loophole affecting far less trusted, far more heavily discounted budget brands on the same shelf. To be entirely clear, there is no evidence Sanitarium has done anything a regulator would object to, and the ingredient panel is fully compliant with Australian food law from top to bottom. The lesson here isn't that Sanitarium is secretly a bad product. It's that decades of genuinely earned health brand trust can quietly extend to cover details a company was never actually required to disclose in the first place. A wholesome reputation, however deserved, is simply not the same document as a nutrition panel. Sanitarium is a not-for-profit food company with a long public record of community and health education work, and none of that history is being disputed here. This entry is specifically about one labeling gap on one product, not a verdict on the company as a whole. That distinction matters because it's exactly the kind of nuance that gets lost when a brand's overall reputation does the persuading instead of its ingredient list. Step back from all 8 jars now, and a single pattern starts to emerge across the entire supermarket aisle. The brands investing hardest in earthy fonts, sun-drenched paddock imagery, and words like natural or wholesome aren't necessarily the ones cutting the most corners behind the label. Sometimes they're the ones with genuinely the least to declare. And sometimes, more often than you'd expect, they're simply better at making an entirely ordinary formulation feel like a premium one. That's not a conspiracy, and it's definitely not unique to peanut butter. It's how food marketing works across almost every category on every supermarket shelf in the country. Legal compliance and full transparency are simply not the same thing, and they were never designed to be. The front of a jar is built by a marketing team whose job is to make you feel something in under 2 seconds. The back of that same jar is regulated so that if you actually go looking, you can still find the facts underneath the feeling. None of the 8 products covered in this investigation are unsafe. None are mislabeled in a way that breaches the law, and none are the subject of any current recall or regulatory action. What genuinely separates them is only this: how much effort it takes you, standing in the aisle with a trolley half full, to look past the story printed on the front and find the actual percentage, the actual oil, and the actual country of origin quietly sitting on the back the whole time. It's also worth remembering that not every jar on the shelf plays this game. Choice's own testing found that a handful of products, including some Coles branded jars and Woolworth's macro organic smooth peanut butter, list palm oil by name or use no added oil at all, proving the honest option isn't rare. It's just not the one shouting the loudest from the shelf. Here's a 4-step system you can run in well under 30 seconds. Next time you're standing in the peanut butter aisle wondering which jar to grab. First, check the ingredient list and see exactly where peanuts sit in the order. Genuinely clean jars will show 90 to 100% peanuts as the very first ingredient, with everything else trailing a long way behind as a distant second or third. Second, find the actual country of origin bar on the back of the jar and read the percentage figure printed there, not just the flag or the kangaroo logo splashed across the front, because packing a product in Australia is not remotely the same thing as growing the peanuts here. Third, scan the ingredients for the words vegetable oil or vegetable fat, and treat that as a real possibility of palm oil hiding underneath, since Australian labelling law simply doesn't require the two to be distinguished from each other. Fourth, and finally, compare the sugar and sodium figures per 100 grams across 2 or 3 different jars before you commit, rather than trusting a single front-of-pack claim like lite or no added nasties to tell you the whole nutritional story on its own. None of these 4 steps require a science degree or extra time at the shelf. Together, they take less time than reading this single sentence out loud, and they work on absolutely every jar in the aisle, not just the 8 we've walked through in this video. Keep in mind that none of these 4 checks are about finding a single correct jar for everyone. A shopper managing a tight grocery budget and a shopper chasing a specific macro target can both walk away from the same shelf having made the right call for themselves, as long as they're choosing with the actual label in front of them instead of the story on the front. What actually separates a genuinely clean jar of peanut butter from a heavily marketed one usually isn't safety, and it usually isn't fraud either. It's simply how much a company is willing to lean on your assumptions instead of correcting them for you. Nothing in this investigation should stop you buying the peanut butter you already love and trust. If you know exactly what's inside the jar and you're genuinely happy with that trade-off, that's an informed choice you're making with your eyes open, not a mistake anyone's tricked you into. The real shift worth taking away from 20 minutes of your life is a simple habit. Read the ingredient list before you ever read the front label. Every single time you shop, on every product, not just this one. And if peanut butter labels turned out to be this layered once you actually look closely, imagine what's quietly sitting inside your loaf of bread. That one's coming next.